There's only one tool you ever need to fix a crash damaged car. That's a nice job.
But maybe my X3M is a little bit too far gone for gaffer tape. We've already stripped it back entirely, removing the engine and all of the panels, and finally started actually rebuilding the car by putting on a new steering rack and subframe. But the problem is here, we still need to fit a new chassis leg before that can get bolted on permanently. And we've also got loads of interior damage to deal with as well, given that every single airbag had gone in the car.
Not too bad. Now we've already got the engine out of this car because we need to fix the bent chassis leg. Now we're waiting on parts to be able to do that, so we need to make the most of our time now and do the other bits which need doing before the engine goes back in. Do you reckon that'll pass an MOT now? Auto glass repair.
Auto glass replace.
I'm Gavin from Auto Glass.
We have a lot to do. We also need to see if the bodywork's hiding any nasty surprises, and we can see most of it, but there's one bit that we can't.
And that is the roof, because it's wrapped currently in like a satin black colour which looks super faded and weathered, so we need to get that off there to see if there's anything that needs repairing on the roof of the car that might be covering. So using a heat gun we heat up the wrap and start pulling it off. Although it did start off quite brittle, we found with more and more heat the more pliable it was to come off the roof. And with a bit of time, effort and patience the wrap started to come off, and it definitely looks a lot better in grey.
Yeah, loads better.
Why would you wrap that black?
I have no idea. I think the whole car at some point was satin black, but leaving that, not a vibe. Grey is much better.
Grey is, yeah.
It's the one for now. And we can take off this nasty rear light tint as well. Some of you might call it de-chabbing it. I'm just gonna call it getting it ready for me to re-chab it. Yeah! Much better. Transition. And we've also covered off the fuel lines, brake lines, and the aircon pipes. Let's get this outside and get the engine in.
So with no engine, seats or brakes, we started to pull the car outside.
Well, that didn't go well. So we did everything but one thing. We completely forgot to do anything with the prop shaft, and that was just kind of getting jammed, so we're going to cable tie that in place and try again.
And although this wasn't the easiest thing to do, given that the engine's out, it was a lot lighter, which did make it a lot easier to push than you'd think.
I'm going to pretend that was really easy, but it really wasn't. We have got some work to do on the engine. And I think the first job to do on this is drain every single fluid out of every single part.
So we start by taking out the sump plug to drain the engine oil out, and then follow that with the gearbox oil. And then it's out with the prop, which goes to the front diff, which is just held in with 4 e-Torx bolts. Now, because we've got a lot of work to do on this engine, what we want to do is get it on the engine stand. So what that means is separating the gearbox from the engine itself, and the next step to doing that is removing the starter and starting to take out some of the bolts for the gearbox. So with the starter removed and unplugged, that then gave us access to unbolt the torque converter. So to do this, what we had to do was undo them one by one and then turn the flywheel manually to be able to gain access to the next one. And there were 6 in total, so not the easiest to do. The next thing to take off was a bunch of brackets which hold in some of the pipe works for the lambda sensors and the GPF, I believe. And then that just left us with a few bolts. We had to take out the top end of the gearbox, which should then let us separate the two. So I put a dolly underneath the gearbox to allow us to move that pretty easily, lower the engine down to it and take those last few bolts out. All in all, I'd say it wasn't too bad a job really. We managed to get the two separated in about an hour, and now we can actually concentrate on the work which we've got to do on the engine. But before we do that, we want to get it on an engine stand.
So now we have the gearbox removed and we've got the engine left to do something with. Now we're going to be putting it from the engine crane here onto Tom's engine stand, which he has modified slightly to make better, and hopefully it can take the weight of this engine no problems. Feeling hopeful?
Yes.
Because we have a lot to do to make sure this engine's actually okay.
So using the original gearbox hardware, we can bolt the engine stand bracket into the holes for the gearbox, and once those are nice and tight, we can slide up the actual stand itself, which should then take the weight of it. This should make it a little bit easier to work on because the engine's not swinging around everywhere, and also as well, it means we can turn the engine over so we can work on whichever part we like.
If this works first time. Oh.
Now Tom has actually done some modifications to this engine stand so it better deals with the heavier engines like this S58.
Now you should start selling them.
I think it just takes the stress off the gearbox bolts.
But with the engine now securely on a stand, we can start looking at doing the front differential. So the first thing to come out is both front drive shafts. Now the drive shafts themselves just tap out, but then there's a few bolts in order to take this kind of casing off with it. And then it was the same again on the other side, but the bolts on this side allow complete removal of the diff. So drive shaft comes out, and then the last few bolts come out, which then means that we can take the differential off. And look how small it is. And then it was time to spin the engine over slightly because we want to gain access to the turbos. We have got some question marks over the condition of these because one of the actuators got bust in the crash, and we want to see if any other damage has been done to them. So to have a better look at those, it's off with the downpipes, which is super easy to do because we can just unplug the lambers and then take off the V-band with one bolt. And then we can start disconnecting the oil and coolant lines, ready to start taking the turbos off the engine. Both of these are just held on with some little Torx bolts, and then they just take a bit of prying in order to get them off. Now when replacing these, we're going to have to replace the O-rings to make sure they don't leak, because there'd be nothing more frustrating than that. And then for the rear turbo, there's a couple of heat shields, which then give us access to all of the bolts which we need to take out to remove the manifold from the block. But I wanted to give those a quick squirt with WD-40 before I started trying to take them off, just to give them the best chance of not snapping. Even though the engine's pretty new, it's still a possibility. And then one by one we can crack those bolts off and then wind them out, ready for that turbo to come off. But we were having a proper fight with these coolant lines until we realised that we missed out a bolt which we needed to take out to get them off. So once that was out, it was a lot easier. And that is now one of the turbos down, and we just want to cover up these exhaust ports to make sure that nothing drops in there, because I may or may not have dropped a bolt in there instantly. And then it was the same story on the front turbo. Now this is the one that's took the hit, and this is the one that we're worried about. So it's off with the coolant and oil feeds again, and then it's out with all of the manifold bolts. With the engine in the car, I can see this being a proper nightmare, because some of the bolts are pretty inaccessible, even with the engine tilted on its side with perfect access. It wouldn't be an easy job, let me tell you that. And now the second turbo is coming off, and unfortunately it's looking like what we thought was the case is the case. There is some damage on this turbo, and I don't know if it's going to be salvageable or not.
Right, turbos are now removed. I just need to cover these ports with tape, but we have found a shocking discovery on the front turbo here. Tom, everyone wants you to do your finest presenting again.
If you can see here, the impact from hitting this actuator has actually pushed it, somehow not managed to damage the compressor housing, but it's actually cracked the body for the bearing.
That is not good.
Like all the way around.
That's probably the most obvious bit. There we go. That is not good. Now we have took these turbos off for a reason, and that's because we got a message on I think our first video from a company called Litco, which is a turbo specialist, and they've offered to give these turbos a look over and maybe even a little hybridness, and I'm hoping that he can sort that for us. I'm going to post it to him, and if there's a big problem then we'll have to come back to it later, but fingers crossed he can sort it and just change that call. So now the turbos are off, shall we get her upside down?
Yes, let's get the sump off.
Upside down, boy you turn me inside out, round and round.
So now it's time to flip the engine over because we want to be taking the sump off next. We have got some inspection to do inside here to see whether this engine is completely scrap or not. Hopefully this time it's not.
Now there is going to be a point on this build where we kind of have to slow down because we're going to be waiting for parts, and we're going to be waiting just in general for stuff to happen, and in that time I'm going to need a new car, so I have been on the lookout, but I'm still yet to find something that's going to fit the bill, because I did find this Bmw M3 the other day which looks really nice, and as you all know I do love a Beamer.
And I've got an idea for a build that involves either an E92 M3 or an F80 M3. But to complete this dream project, I need something that's in good condition, something with a clean history that hasn't been crashed.
But I did a car vertical report on it and it wasn't good.
So you can see straight away Car Vertical's summary tells you that this car hasn't been stolen, had any mileage discrepancies or got any outstanding finance, but it has got an amber warning light for accidents. And then it does bring up some photos from the auction site where this car was shown damaged, and it is not looking good, and is definitely not going to be the prime candidate for what I've got in mind. On the theft report, it does show that this car isn't currently outstanding as stolen or been stolen in the past, and also from the odometer graph we can see that it's not been clocked. But in the damage section we can see that this car has been marked as a category B insurance write-off, which means it can never go back on the road, so it's going to be no good to me. And if I was to buy this car, it's going to be completely useless apart from for parts.
So if you want to do a car vertical report on a car car that you're looking to buy, to make sure that it's not a lemon, use discount code Chris and the link in the description to save yourself some money. Let's get on with this engine.
So to gain access to all of the sump bolts, we need to take off this charge pipe, which got absolutely annihilated during the crash, which is going to need replacing, and second-hand these are a fortune. They're actually cheaper from BMW. And then this pulley bracket is in the way of one of them, so we have to remove the belt, the pulley, and also that bracket to gain access to that.
So now we've got access to most of the bolts. So now we've got access to all of the bolts to remove the sump. Now we have also noticed that around here it does look quite wet, and we've looked at the rear main seal, that looks fine, so I'll just presume that it's the sump gasket itself which is failing, and that's a good thing because obviously it can be replaced. Now we are taking this off. Now the reason why we're doing this is because we want to inspect the oil pickup pipe and also the rod bearings as well to see how much is in there and to see whether this engine's going to be savable. Because you may remember we found a few chunks inside the oil filter, which is never good, is it? No.
So we're really praying that there's not going to be anything too horrific inside here. We don't want to see big chunks of bearing, or well, supposed to be chunks of anything ideally, so we can take out all of the sump bolts and then pry that off and see how much is lurking inside this engine.
Okay, here we go. What we thinking? I think that actually looks pretty decent.
There's no horrible chunks or anything.
No, definitely not. Do you know what I'm surprised by though? Is the gasket is, well, these don't actually use a gasket, they just use kind of a Loctite sealant, but is pretty non-existent. Is it on here? A bit more here, but it's very slim though, isn't it? Yeah, like, look there. Does that come out on that? And you can see why it's failed here. Because it's like overlapped into the engine.
That is a very, very thin.
Yeah.
This side actually looks a little bit thin.
Oh yeah, it does. But again, that's thin at the same point here, isn't it? So is this going to be a common problem on the S58 engine? Is another sump gasket leak on a BMW? You've never heard of it before, have you?
No, never.
Okay, here is the pickup pipe. This is what's going to save us from massive chunks hopefully going through the engine. So if there is big bits in here, then, or if there's lots of big bits, we could be in trouble. I don't dare look.
I'm looking. There's 3 bits. What is that?
That's a small piece of something.
Yes, it is.
Is it dirty or?
It's hard to tell what that is.
Well, it's not full, is it?
No.
Definitely not. Well, I think, let's not look at it too hard, but I think this engine's going to live another day.
Hopefully.
I don't know if you can see that on the end of my fingertip, that's what was in the pickup pipe, and weirdly enough, we think that's plastic, not metal, and not bearing material. But there is plastic components in this engine, you know, that's not plastic, that's plastic, plastic, plastic. So it's got potential that it could have come from somewhere else, and the pickup is just doing its job, filtering those bits.
Well, that was a lot better than what we'd imagined it would be. When we took that sump off, we were expecting to see something obvious in terms of component failure, fragments of something, but it simply wasn't the case. But after a bit of hard thinking and some deliberation between me and Tom, we kind of got cold feet about everything we were about to do.
Right, after seeing what was in the sump and what was in the pickup pipe, I'm getting a little bit cold feet because I've actually ordered bearings for this to replace them because I thought it's better to be safe than sorry. I was expecting to see quite a few chunks in the pickup pipe or see something a little bit more worrying than what we have. What would you be doing, Tom?
Trying to drive it as quickly as possible.
Like, it's not the fact of it's extra work, I don't mind the extra work, that's fine.
No, we've got this far.
We've got this far, like we're most of the way there, but I do sometimes feel when it's been put together originally.
I'm not sure if the factory in BMW know what they're doing more than us in a garage.
This is my point. So, you know, when you take all of this stuff apart, you open yourself up to potential more risk in the future if it's not done 100%. I'm confident we could do it 100% and by the book, but is it worth it? What would you guys do? I'm sure you're going to let me know in the comments anyway, so please do.
But before we made our decision on what our plan of action was going to be with this engine, we wanted to just make one final inspection on these pickup pipes and returns. So we take off the plastic casing and then inspect one gauze, which looked absolutely immaculate. Not one piece of anything on either side, which is a really good sign. So I pop that one back together and then start taking out the second one. And again, the second one, absolutely perfect. This really threw a spanner in the works, so we decided to remove the main pickup and then check it properly and flush it with oil and see if anything came out.
Right, I've got to make my mind up now on what we do at this point, because my original intention was to change those rod bearings to make sure they're going to be fine for the future. And obviously there is a risk to doing that, because it then means that you're tampering with something which is like a sealed unit. Obviously they are made to be serviced, but you know, we're not going to do it as well as the BMW factory put it together, probably, let's face it. And we can find zero traces of bearing or anything that looks worrying at all in the sump or any of the pickup pipes. The only thing that we've found is a couple of little bits of plastic, we think, and the fact that the sump gasket's leaking. So we can repair that now as it is without going any further. And I do genuinely think that's the right way to go with it, because I just think going any further than this just opens up potential risk, and there is nothing that we're seeing that is worrying us at all here. So as much as I wanted to do those rod bearings, I think I've got to make the decision that's right for the car, right for the engine, and make sure that it's going to be as good as it can be. And I think this is the right one.
So I've decided to leave it as it is. So we put everything back together and torqued it all to the factory specifications. And then replace the oil pump sprocket and also the cover for that as well. And the next thing is then refitting the sump. Now we want to make sure that the new gasket doesn't leak, so we have to clean up the engine and the sump as best as we can before refitting that with the new sealant. And me and Tom are both praying that we've made the right decision here, because if we put this engine back together and then get it in the car and finally get it started, and a mile down the road notice it started knocking, we're going to have to start this process all over again, which is going to be a real nightmare.
So we are now ready to put the sump back on, and there's a few things which I've needed to get from BMW to do this. The first of which is the gasket, or well, it's actually the lack of gasket, because this is what they sell you. It's Loctite SI5970. Apparently that's what they use in the factory, so that's what's going back on it, and hopefully this time it doesn't leak like it did before. We've prepped the surfaces, cleaned them down, got all the oil off them, so we should be good to go.
But now our decision is made, there is no turning back, so there's no point being negative about it. We may as well push forward in the most positive manner we can, which is getting straight on with it. So with the mating surfaces clean, we can put the Loctite on there and then refit the sump. But there's one more thing which we're going to need before we can start bolting this down.
Okay, sump is now refitted, and we've got all new sump bolts as well. Because these are aluminium, it's better to be safe than sorry and replace these when you're doing this. Let's get them on!
Replacing all of these bolts costs about 30 quid, which isn't cheap, but it is better to be safe than sorry. The last thing we want to happen is for this sump to leak now, because that means taking the subframe off the car again, which would be a nightmare. So with all of the bolts now hand threaded in, we can start tightening them up. So we get them just nipped up ever so slightly, and then we can start torquing them to spec, which for these, if I remember correctly, is 24 Newton meters. And I was really chuffed to do this because it means I can use my new fancy torque wrench which Machine Mart sent me. So to tighten these, you do them in sort of a star pattern, doing the opposites, and then go around all of them again.
Okay, while we're waiting for the Loctite to dry on the sump, I thought it would be a prime opportunity to try and get this cleaned up, because you can see that this car has been used and never really looked after properly. So while the engine's out, it seems like the best chance to get this engine bay as clean as it can possibly be for the work we're going to do in the future, and also to make it look good when the engine goes back in.
So I start off by spraying the entire engine bay down with a citrus degreaser. I'm sure some of you will cry about this, but we've covered off all of the holes into the actual car itself with tape earlier at the start of the video, and also bagged up and covered off any fuel lines and brake lines or anything important too. And once that's all foamed over and it's had a good dwell time, I can then go around with a detailing brush and get all of the little intricate parts all clean, because I really cannot stand working on a dirty car, as but nothing more frustrating. And then I can simply just give that whole engine bay a good rinse down, but it just seemed criminal just to do this. The rest of the car deserves a bit of love too, and it would also be good to see if there is any marks that we've missed on the rest of the car, which we're not going to see when it's dirty. Now, washing a car is something we all have to do, so if you want to do yours a little bit better, we've actually teamed up with My Car Cleaning, and they're going to be supporting you guys at home. So there's going to be a discount code to get yourself some money off most of their range. The reason why I picked My Car Cleaning is because this is genuinely the company which used to supply me with everything I needed when I was running my detailing business.
So if you want to look after your car a bit better, Tom, tell them where they need to go.
My Car Cleaning.
And where's the discount code?
It's on the screen now.
Although the whole car still looks crap, it is looking a hell of a lot better, and just in time because she needs to pay a little visit somewhere. How are you, Mush?
Hello, matey.
Which is much easier getting it back on the trailer now the car actually rolls. So using the winch, we can pull it on and get it strapped down.
But I will explain that in the next video. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. If you have, don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're not already, and I'll catch you next time.